This is the Second Studio, hosted by the Architecture and Design Office fame. My name is David Lee, and with me is Marina Borderonay. This week, our guest is Grant Bowen.
Grant is the CEO and founder of Peak Projects, an owner-representative company based in California.
Yeah, and we will hear in the recording a bit more about Peak, but they have close to 100 projects across the United States, I think a few things international even.
Yeah.
And so they're very successful. And this is an opportunity for us to hear from Grant, his story, of course, but also what an owner's representative does, their value that they offer to and they bring to projects, and some of his insights to what it takes and what it means to run a project successfully anyway. So I think for clients, architects, contractors, everyone will find this interesting to hear from someone who has a successful business and does a lot of different houses. You know, what are the key things that we can all do to have projects be efficient, more on budget, and all these types of things? Sponsors.
The Second Studio podcast is made possible by support from Autodesk.
Autodesk has been part of the design conversation since 1982, providing the tools that help architects around the globe imagine and create beautifully designed, memorable buildings that people love and admire.
Autodesk supports the work of the Second Studio, bringing the architecture community together, sparking curiosity, and leading vibrant interviews with the industry's visionaries and thought leaders.
The Second Studio works hard to carry the architecture conversation forward, and Autodesk is proud to contribute to this podcast. Learn more about Autodesk by clicking the link in our episode notes.
We are supported by Enscape. Enscape is a real-time visualization and VR tool for the AEC industry. It's also a program that we use in our office. And why do we like it? Well, it's a plugin and not a separate application, which means we can work natively in our modeling programs such as Revit, SketchUp, Rhino, ArchiCAD, and Vectorworks. It's easy and versatile. We've used many other rendering programs, and many are just way too difficult to use. With Enscape, it's easy to create renderings, 360 panoramas and videos, and immersive VR experiences. It also renders in real time, so you can see the light, shadows, and material as you're working. So start your free trial today by clicking the Enscape 3D link in our show notes.
This is the Second Studio with myself, Marina, and our guest, Grant. Here we go.
So I grew up in Plainwell, Michigan. It's a small town of 4,000 people in Southwest Michigan. Grew up on a little lake. Mom was a public school teacher. Dad was a wastewater treatment consultant.
Right.
Grew up outside fishing, boating, playing in the woods. You know, it was great. My grandpa was pretty artistic. My dad was a ceramicist at night, and so was kind of around those creative people early on, which was awesome. Kind of fostered my love for art and creativity. I was really into drawing and painting. My dad was also pretty handy. You know, when we were growing up, when something broke, we kind of just fixed it ourselves. So I love building model rockets with him growing up. And, you know, as I grew older, I built, you know, bigger things like skateboard ramps, and in the winter built big snowboard jumps and rails to use with my friends.
Nice. So
was always into, you know, design and kind of building things from a young age. You know, in high school, kind of did odd jobs like stained decks, painted houses, that stuff, so I could work outside, work my own hours. I got into hockey at a young age. And played a lot, kind of traveled around the Midwest, traveled to Canada, and kind of in 8th grade at that point, if you're decent, you kind of go to Canada and play juniors. And that was kind of laid out for me, but I didn't want to move away from home. I wanted to stay and grow up with my friends and not live with a host family. So stopped. And my dad was kind of like, well, what are you going to do with your time? And I was like, you know, I'll keep playing soccer, snowboarding, you know, do the high school thing. He's like, well, let me show you what I did. He popped in the VHS. It's him, you know, shirtless, short shorts, mustache, pole vaulting. And I was like, whoa, that looks rad. And he was like, you know, I'm happy to show you. You know, I had a lot of fun doing it. I was like, all right. So we went to the high school track, and I started pole vaulting and got super into it. And that was what I was doing throughout high school. Got pretty good at it, and helped me get recruited to Brown. So I ended up leaving Michigan, going to Brown. I wanted to kind of go get out of small town Michigan, go somewhere near a bigger city, either out east or out west. And so landed at Brown. It was an amazing experience, super diverse, pole vaulted through Brown. I studied economics, was very into the stock market, finances, etc. But, always had that love for building and art. So RISD, Rhode Island School of Design, was right down the hill from Brown. And so I took a lot of art and architecture classes there, which was fun to kind of like scratch that itch. My junior year, I worked on Wall Street in New York. Didn't have a good time. Wore a suit, rode the subway every day, cranked an Excel.
That seems, from what we know you, that seems like the very polar opposite. I can't imagine you wearing a suit in Wall Street. That doesn't seem to fit at all.
I know. Influenced by the East Coast kids I went to school with, and it was interesting work, and it was very lucrative at a young age. But I wanted to, after college, be in a place where I could snowboard and play outside and stuff. And so I just didn't really have a good summer. I mean, I had a lot of fun, but not working. So an actual friend of mine on the track team had a similar experience, and he said, "Hey, you should really look at this cool company called DPR in the Bay Area." And I was like, "Okay, tell me about it." So I went to a job fair with him. Met the DPR guys, and they flew me out to San Francisco. I had a great visit. San Francisco was close to Tahoe, so I could snowboard. It was a progressive place. It was sunny. I was like, this sounds like a great place to start a new career. So
and so DPR was a finance company?
It was actually a large commercial construction company.
Okay.
And they build a lot of medical manufacturing facilities, Stanford buildings, stuff like that. And so they actually had a strong Brown contingency at DPR. And they were known for taking kind of non-engineering students and turning them into project engineers and project managers. So I was one of the few economics majors that got a job there. I think I told you before, in college, I built bars for fraternities and some furniture to kind of make money. And I actually used that in my interview. I'm like, hey, I didn't study engineering, but like I can build stuff. And I think it went over well. So I got a job there, moved out to San Francisco with some college friends. But that was in 2007 when the economy wasn't doing well, right? And I wasn't put on very interesting projects, and I really wanted to build interesting, complex, contemporary, sustainable projects, and that just wasn't happening at DPR for me. So, kind of leveraged my network. Got some interviews and actually interviewed at a family office. That was Bayshore Global Management. And they were doing some really cool projects for a singular family. And so that sounded super interesting to me. The interview went well, and I ended up getting a job there just 6 months after working at DPR. So I was only at DPR for a short stint, went to Bayshore, and then I was at Bayshore for 7 years, managing this one family's residential real estate portfolio. We were doing projects in San Francisco and Silicon Valley, as well as New York. And that's what really exposed me to high-end residential design and construction. And it was super fun. We did some really cool projects. The clients were amazing. And after 7 years, I was like, wow, this is fun. I think that there's like a real niche here. There's a real need for my services, for these services in the broader market. So, mustered up the courage, left Bayshore in 2014, amicably, I must say. I still consult back to Bayshore to this day. And that was 2014. So started Peak Projects 10 years ago.
Wow, that's interesting. So what were you doing at Bayshore? Was it kind of like being an owner's rep, like a lot of the same things you do now?
Yeah, it was, yes. We would help that principal acquire properties, so manage the due diligence process, as well as build teams. and then support and manage those teams through design, permitting, and construction. And then there we also helped with property maintenance and management.
Gotcha. Yeah. Interesting. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, so what was the motivation to go off and do something on your own? And I ask that question because I do think it takes a certain type of person to want to do that and then continue to do that. Like we were just talking before the call, that having a business is not for everybody. So I'm just curious, like, what was the motivation to attempt this and then obviously keep going with it once it started?
Yeah. Bayshore was a great place to work, but, you know, I always kind of wanted to do something on my own. And I wanted to have kind of more control of my own schedule. And you know, a lot of architects, contractors that I met were just really excited me about doing this for other people. And I couldn't do it for other people at Bayshore.
Right.
So me wanting to help more people kind of led me to start Peak and really take the concept to the broader public. And I've always been a pretty hardworking, ambitious person. I was instilled that with from my parents. You know, they're hardworking, middle class folks, and so always wanted to do something on my own that, you know, I had creative control over.
Yeah,
it's pretty interesting because if we kind of like look back at your story, you know, like it seems like you've always somehow managed to use both sides of the brain, like the creative and the more like rational, you know, analytic type of mindset, which is very interesting. And it seems like you're also very conscious in trying to find like your personal balance in what you do. The other thing that's interesting is that eventually you move pretty far from Michigan at the end of the day.
Yeah, but you're still surrounded by snow.
You're
can
still
see the snow in the
surrounded by
background.
snow, but you still move pretty far. But I could see how you were already very entrepreneurial at a young age, like doing the bars and kind of like even getting into like different types of physical activities or creative activities on your own. So it's interesting. I found every time you kind of like look at where you are in life and look back like the things you went through, it wasn't by accident. Like it was kind of like most expected, you know, for those things to happen in some ways.
Yeah, definitely. I've always been interested in trying new things. And I've always had a variety of interests. And I really think, you know, this line of work now kind of suits me really well. You get to use both sides of your brain, the analytical side, more creative, qualitative side. So yeah, definitely the upbringing, the interests and all of that kind of definitely led me here.
So talking about Peak projects, maybe give the folks listening some background and some descriptions as to, you know, the size of your operation, the types of projects you focus on, how many projects you have going on. So we get a sense of the operation and who you guys are.
Yep. Sounds good. So Peak Projects is owner's representative and project management consultancy. We're 59 people as of today. We're managing a little under 100 projects. We're currently working in 12 states: Hawaii, California, Nevada, Washington, Colorado, Utah, Montana, Wyoming, Texas, New York, Pennsylvania, and Florida.
You should just list the states. You should just list the states you're not operating in. Eventually, that'll be the shorter list.
One day, yes. We're also doing some projects in British Columbia, Canada, Mexico, Puerto Rico, and the Dominican Republic. Majority of those projects are high-end single-family residential projects. Our typical construction budget is between $15 and $50 million. We do have some outliers at, you know, 100 million, 150, and even one behemoth at 250 million.
What?
Yeah, pretty wild project in Florida. But we help clients throughout the entire process. You know, we play a critical role in overseeing and representing the owner's interests, you know, throughout the planning, design, and construction phases of a project. kind of like I described earlier, will help in all phases as early as due diligence to help clients acquire properties intelligently, help build high performing teams, negotiate those contracts, and then help create momentum and maintain momentum through the design, permitting, and construction process, overseeing the project from the owner's goals and objectives perspective, as well as the budget and schedule perspective, and really just have the team have an amazing time with the project, have the client enjoy the process, make it efficient for all the team members, and make it an enjoyable experience along the way.
Yeah, it's interesting. So maybe you would know better than us, but I feel like the role and position of an owner's representative in the single family residential space is relatively new. I want to say the last maybe 15 years or so, the last 10 years, it's become much more popular. I think owners reps have been much more common in the commercial space, which with, the budgets are much, much higher for big projects. But the question is, I guess for most folks who might not have heard of this position before, why would such an individual or company be needed in addition to the typical two big players, which are the architect and the contractor, kind of the two that people think about, and then throw in designer possibly. Those are like the three that everyone knows of. And, folks might be wondering, well, those two or three people, that covers all my bases. So why would I have an owner's rep on top of that?
Yeah, totally. I think, like you said, the position has evolved a lot in the last 10 years, right? I think the reason owners reps exist more so now is there's an increased emphasis on project management. I think there's just a growing recognition of the importance of professional project management in construction projects. The projects overall are increasing in complexity. I think you're right. It was more common in commercial projects, but, as the size and scale and complexity of these residential projects increased, so did the need for, holistic professional management. I think there's also been a shift towards like integrated project delivery models, which promotes collaboration, risk sharing, and definitely like the early involvement of all key stakeholders like pre-con GCs, et cetera. In this model, you align on project goals and optimize project outcomes, right? Whereas, traditionally you might hire an architect, complete the entire design, and then hire a GC. I think the integrated project delivery model needs more upfront management in that process. I think good owners now really focus on risk mitigation. There's various risks and challenges along a construction project, economic uncertainty, supply chain disruptions, regulatory changes, weather, et cetera. I think ORs, good ones at least, are tasked with identifying, assessing, mitigating those risks on behalf of the client and the project team. And, at the end of the day, I think affluent owners want specialized help, right? Successful people are always looking for ways to improve how they do things. If you can hire an expert, they typically do, which has led to a rise in owners representatives.
Yeah, because you could ask your architect and contractor to kind of like figure stuff on the fly and do it as best as they can. But ultimately, that's not their training, their forte, or even sometimes their interest.
Well, that's an interesting comment because speaking to your point, Grant, about the complexity of projects, and obviously when you have projects that are $20 million in construction, they are complex, but I think folks also they underestimate how complex smaller budget projects are too.
Definitely.
And so I think before, let's say, the architect was sort of the one that was being the owner's rep. And when there's not an owner's representative, your responsibilities as an OR typically falls on the architect. But speaking to the complexity of projects, it's sometimes we even forget how complex these things are. And there is therefore an advantage to having, let's say, this third person, the OR, who kind of is a project manager in a sense, but also sort of oversees and keeps tabs on all of the things, everything across the entire board. And it's very easy in a project that lasts 2 years, which is a typical timeline for even a modestly sized project, a house, for things to fall through the cracks. Because the architect, as architects, we have enough stuff to worry about. And I feel like when there is an OR, there's kind of, from our perspective, in a way, there's also a safety net that you bring for in case that we or the contractor forget something. When we are specializing or focusing on the architecture, the contractor's focusing on the building. There's all this other stuff.
Yeah, I think the word focusing is very important, because if we lose focus on what we've been hired for, then I think that's where the projects maybe start to not be as successful as it could have been. Because we just try to take on too much on our plate. So having an OR, to me, the best advantage is that we can really focus on what we're really good at and kind of let everyone else focus on what they're really good at.
Yeah, well said. I think, traditionally, architects played that role. And, I think there can be conflict sometimes, right, of between maybe for the architect and the GC, right? I think it really makes sense to have someone in the owner's seat just to mitigate any conflicts that the contractor might have of managing their own work or with the architect, project aesthetic and direction conflicts. Sometimes those can be at odds with the client sometimes. And I think it's beneficial and nice to have a non-biased third party managing those folks on behalf of the client. So like you said, the architect can focus on what they do best and what they want to do, and the GC can focus on putting good work in place, and the OR can kind of take care of the rest, all the administrative burdens, et cetera, and also hold the client accountable to make decisions in a timely fashion. We find our architect and GC partners really value that with us, and that we're helping them get the information they need quickly and efficiently.
Yeah. There's a few things I want to pick up on what you said. First was I forget what you called it, non-biased
third party. Non-biased third party.
Yeah. It's a great phrase, because it's a very good description. And you know this because we've talked about it before, but I think that's something that as a value add, just due to the nature of your position, is significant. Because when a client speaks to an architect and then they turn and they speak to a contractor, again, we're representing the best for the project, but also our own needs to a certain degree. And there's always a little bit of friction between the architect and the contractor generally. And so I find sometimes for clients, especially at the beginning of a project, they just don't know who to fully trust, because it's very easy to feel like, well, the architect's going to give me certain answers because they are an architect, and the GC is going to give me certain answers because they are a GC. Whereas an owner's rep, I mean, obviously you have stake because let's say you want the project, but it's different. Like you're not designing it and you're not building it. So it allows you to be a non-biased third party, which I think from a client standpoint would be very beneficial, especially in the early phases, just to have that person who can say, I've worked, in your case, on, I don't know how many projects you have going on, almost 100. I've seen a bunch of things. I can tell you that, this is the way to go. This is fair or not fair, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, well said. And I think one thing that, because we ideally love to get involved early to help set those expectations. We get involved later in the process, often too, when the team hasn't set clear goals, objectives for the project, and then we kind of have to step in and do that. So I think it's really important to work with the client in the very early days of a project and establish their goals, their objectives, any constraints, and talk about budget and schedule early. Yeah. And if you do that well in the beginning, that just sets you up for success, right? I think there's a business management author I like, Peter Lencioni. I think he says something like, in a good organization, you have to tell people what to do 7 times before they start hearing it. So I think, that happens, or that doesn't happen a lot on projects, right? We'll talk about budget and schedule once, and then then it doesn't get talked about again, right?
Yeah.
And that's what happens when we come on late and there's budget or schedule issues on a project, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, the team didn't always track back to those original goals, right? And we always are holding those at the forefront of the project. They're in every weekly update, and we're tracking them so they don't get lost and they don't get forgot about, right? The client's goals are always held in front of us.
It's interesting that sometimes you guys are brought on later on into a project, and this has happened to us, I feel like more often than an average architecture office, where we are called on when the client is already partway through a process with a designer, an architect, whatever. And it's interesting because in that role, we're acting in the beginning as a consultant to kind of do an audit, let's say. Mm-hmm. But I still sometimes sense that there's not as much trust in what we're saying, simply because, again, we could have skin in the game. So it's kind of like, oh yeah, you should redo everything and hire us and we'll start the project from scratch, even though that's not what we always propose. But because we're the architect, they're like, I don't know if I should listen to you.
Well, and also in some of those cases, like because of that, miscommunication or non-existing communication about the sensitive topic, which are budget and schedule, it feels like if you don't talk about it during, the design process and the design phases, it becomes kind of like this taboo that, like the elephant in the room that nobody wants to bring up. And then you just kind of burn your bridges and kill your relationship between the client and the architect or designer. And it's kind of too bad because it went that way because nobody really did what they were supposed to do or brought it up. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of too late at this point to, I feel, sometimes savage what's there. Mm. When maybe if you feel like somebody needs to step in to actually help the situation, then that might save the project from going past that non-return point.
And Grant, to your point, the reoccurring emphasis on things or weekly meetings or however you kind of interpret that, the 7 times, right, is crucial. It's when stuff doesn't get talked about for a long period. That's when problems end up happening.
Yeah, bad news doesn't age well.
But so how do you see clients finding you as an owner's rep? Is it because the architect or the contractor mention it to them, be like, you should probably hire someone else to work on this project? Are they aware of this profession existing in that field, or how do they come on board, basically?
Yeah, great question. I would say the majority of our inbound referrals are coming from industry partners, like yourselves, architects, contractors, interior designers, folks like that who are on board with a project and a client and see the need for a collaborative, empathetic owner's rep like Peak to jump in and help. So I think that speaks to how well we work with our industry partners and that our industry partners value us as, strategic collaborators or strategic partners, if you will, and helping these projects come to fruition efficiently and effectively. So majority of our industry partners, we do get clients who are doing repeat projects, family offices, single family offices, multifamily offices, land use attorneys, real estate agents. Those are all the folks who are referring us work, and we don't do much marketing. Our website's pretty vague. We're just busy, heads down, executing, doing really good work, and we think good work begets more work.
It's interesting because if we were to speak with an architect or designer and ask their opinion on an owner's representative, you would get mixed answers depending on who you're speaking with. Mm-hmm. And I usually find there's not a lot of middle ground neutrality. It's either they had a great experience and they love it, or they hated it. And they're like, be careful of all owners' reps. It's sketchy territory. So talking from the latter position, I think the concern that other professionals have, so the architect and let's say the contractor, is that when there's an owner's rep involved, and maybe the client would have the same concern too, that it's just another layer of like another person have to go through to get to the client. So there's not going to be direct communication between the architect and the client, or the client and the architect. There's going to be this hindrance that's in the way, this kind of middle management person, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak to that, if it's true, false, or how you guys operate so that it's not that way? Because I do know this is a concern amongst a lot of professionals.
No, totally. We find ourselves having to explain ourselves or apologize for our competitors. But I think since 2014, we've always taken a collaborative, empathetic, and objective approach to our work, which I think is really different. Like you said, unfortunately, owners reps have gotten a bad rep in the past because some individual reps or firms try to prove their worth by, grinding down other team members to prove their worth, or selectively holding information to maybe make themselves look better. Our process is simply to support owners in setting clear goals and objectives, hiring the best and brightest teams, compensating them all fairly, creating a great work environment, collaborating, sharing expertise and resources freely, and doing what's best for the project. In the olden days, maybe that, gruff, heavy-handed model worked, but I think it only worked for clients, right? It didn't work for the team. At the end of the project, they were burnt out. No one wanted to work together again. There was project fatigue. I think in this day, and if you read any leadership or management book, that's not how you get the best work product from people, right? And it's pretty simple to us, but I guess it hasn't been that simple to, others in the industry. And so I think that's why we've been successful, is really looking at it from a strategic partnership lens and trying to help and not oversee or manage, but help the team have what they need to be successful and meet the client's goals. I also think, some owners reps might just do one thing or the other, like specialize in just setting up contracts or just doing, traditional construction management. I think a lot of folks think that, the OR is there to manage or police the general contractor, whereas our expertise and scope aperture is much wider. Like I said before, we get involved with the entire process from due diligence to team selection through construction, and I think that really sets us apart. I think we hire well-educated, experienced, kind, detail-oriented, highly motivated people. We have a culture of learning where everyone's encouraged to make our projects, process, and company better each and every day. And I think that ethos, really sets us apart. And we're hoping that, more companies follow suit.
So if an architect is working on a project and you guys are the OR, does the architect and the contractor still have direct access to a client, or is everything going to you and then to the client?
Obviously each client is different, but we strongly advocate that they definitely still have direct access to the client, right? For the design process to work well, the architect needs to interface with the client. It's such a personal thing that, we strongly advocate for client involvement, at least in the early stages of design and through, final material selection, right? I think for there to be true trust amongst the team, the client has to have a good trusting relationship with the architect and the GC, right? Yeah. Some owners may go to us for information as we're one point of contact, and maybe that's more efficient. And that happens from time to time, but we're always trying to pull in the team to have client interface, like I said, in the design process, or big project milestones, right? Like, it's important that a client shows up, is respectful, and thanks people on their team for working hard on their projects.
I agree with that. But I laugh, but it's definitely true. And
it sounds like
also
babysitting to me.
Well,
sometimes,
but it's kind of an interesting thing, right? Because the owner's rep is the representative of the owner, and you're kind of like the advisor agent throughout the entire process, ideally, of the client and the owner. But there's also, you had mentioned the idea that really you are advocating what's best for the project, which is not always the same thing as what the client wants. In fact, we find fairly often, not necessarily to the client's fault, they're not in line because the client doesn't know this process at all. So sometimes they ask for things or suggest things or want things to go a certain way. And we have to say, look, you're the owner. If you really, really want to try that, we can. But I'm telling you, that's not the recipe for success. But anyway, so the idea, though, is that I think one of the value adds you guys bring is that, again, you're championing the project and whatever's best for the project. And it doesn't mean that you are, again, just cracking the whip on behalf of whatever the owner wants.
Yeah, correct. Well said. That happens often where an issue will come up and we're collectively problem solving, and the recommendation the team makes to the client might not be what the client originally wanted, but it's what's best for the project. And if you go about laying out options in a data-based, objective manner, pros and cons of each, and the recommendation on why, good logical owners will understand and come to terms with that and usually make the right decision.
Do you guys have like an onboarding process to take on clients and project? Like, are you selective as to like basically which project you engage with and which ones you're not, besides just the scope, but in terms of, vibe and relationship?
Yeah, definitely. We're lucky now where we can be a little bit more selective on projects, but a good project to us is architecturally obviously interesting, complex, in a cool place, but more important than not, the client, has to be the right fit. Yeah. They have to share similar values to peak. They need to be respectful and appreciative of us and what we do. And ideally they need to allow us to advise them properly. They need to allow us to hire good teams. They can't just hire a world-class architect and the rest of the consultants off Yelp, right? Yeah. They got to do it right. Right. So we, when we're doing like initial, business development and new client calls, we kind of have our own little list of questions we're asking to try to get and pick at that and understand how they tick and how they think, what their feelings are towards budget and schedule. Do they have realistic expectations, or are we going to need to significantly modify them? Right.
Yeah.
Do they have big blind spots or not? Right. How's this going to be? Because these projects, as you know, are not short, right? If we're getting involved early, we could be working with this client for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, right? Yeah. So you got to make sure it's a good fit, personally and professionally.
And you're going to be most likely the person giving them the good and the bad news too. So I feel like
that's right. Yes.
That's the other advantage of having you guys involved. Like, ooh, this is a challenge. This is the problem. Peak will handle it. We'll talk to the client us.
Yeah, we're happy, and we do that a lot. We shield the team members, the architect, the GC, from a lot of unnecessary negative noise on a project, right? But that's to allow you to focus on what you want to do and not get bogged down by, bad dynamics of a project, right?
Yeah.
If we can shield that from you as much as possible.
I was wondering, does the style of projects you guys work on matters for what you do? Like a modern versus super traditional versus whatever else, or is it not so relevant?
No, good question. It is relevant. I think since I started, 10 years ago in the Bay Area, technology really influenced that. These were tech founders, private equity, VC type folks. Most of them were doing more contemporary projects, right? Mm-hmm. So predominantly most of our work is leaning towards the contemporary side. We have done a little bit of traditional work. We've also done some classical work, with Ferguson and Shamamian, Andrew Skirman, Mark Appleton, folks like that. But I would have to say most of it, sides on the traditional side.
Interesting.
Or on the, contemporary side.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe talking about, getting to the nuts and bolts of what happens typically. I know it varies depending on the project, but typically during the phases. So let's say I'm a client, I'm approaching you, we're having our first meeting, and I've been smart enough to approach you from the very beginning as opposed to later on when shit hits the fan. And I said, okay, I don't know anything about construction or architecture, none of that stuff. Maybe I have an architect in mind and a contractor in mind. I have a healthy budget, I'm going to do a house. What would be some of the key things that you would tell me, or some of the, like you mentioned, blind spots? What are the common blind spots that clients have at the beginning that they're not aware of? Most clients think about budget, they think about style, but beyond that, and maybe schedule, but beyond that, there's not a whole lot. So what are the things that you would tell me that I would, I'm missing from my vision?
Yes, definitely. The biggest blind spots, I think, are kind of not really defining your goals properly in the beginning and taking time, investing time to do that up front, right? A lot of clients will acquire a property, ask a friend who they use, call that architect, and then get going, right? I think it's really important to take your time, think about, ponder what your goals are for the project. Is this, the home for the next 5 years? Is this a forever home? Do you want to have multiple family members and grandkids use it? Really, really understand what this is going to be, and then do your due diligence. And obviously Pete can help with that. Architecturally, what's interesting to you? And from there, we try to get insights from the client on what makes them tick. Are they going to be okay with more of an artistic, non-linear process, or are they going to be quick decision makers, straight down the middle, right? There are different firms that are better for each of those types of people. Or maybe they want to hire an out-of-town architect, where they're going to need a local AOR to execute the project properly. So we really just kind of understand what their long-term goals are, what they want to accomplish, how do they want to accomplish them, what's their working style, and then from our experience in current projects can kind of match them up with potential good design partners and help facilitate interviews and help kind of compare them side by side and help them make an informed decision. But it's really ultimately up to the client and what they want to do in that realm. But let's say we've helped them acquire a property. We've helped them select, an amazing architect, then kind of cruising into the phases, right? In the early concept design phase, right? We're collaborating with the architect and client to ensure there's very specific goals, objectives, and constraints. We're assisting the architect and the client in engaging any other design professionals necessary at that moment. We can provide input and feedback during that design concept. We start establishing our project budgets and timelines. We start our NDA, insurance, and invoice review process. And we'll start holding coordination meetings to ensure forward progress. So very early, we're kind of getting into the project management rhythm with meetings, document administration, budget and schedule management, and kind of carrying this thing through. After concept, obviously there's schematic design. We're helping the client and architect select and engage additional design professionals, structural engineers, pre-con GCs, et cetera. Also reviewing and providing feedback on the design as needed, continuing to ensure alignment with the original project objectives, constraints, and goals. And then we also can help kind of facilitate discussions, obviously respectfully, with the architect around design options, materials, and systems, leveraging our experience from all of our projects. Early on, we like to talk about, the operating and maintenance of a home, because those preferences can influence design. And in every phase, we're obviously updating pricing and schedule information, right?
Yeah.
And in these early phases, this is where we really want to make sure the client loves where they're going and what they have, right? It's so much easier to iterate in the early design phases than later on when you have a bunch of consultants, right? And so we really advise the client to spend as much time as they need with the architect and SD to dial in what they want before they bring in a bunch of other folks.
I totally agree. Jumping back to that first meeting, I'd asked you like what would be the things you would cover with the client. I did not expect your answer to be what it was, which is to make sure the client understands and really thinks about their goals. And what's funny about that answer is that it's precisely the same thing that we would say if we were asked that question. Like, what would be the thing that a client should do that they overlook? And 95% of the time, it's you should really think about what are your, think about it. What are your goals? What are your objectives? What is the big why behind the project? Because, of course, and you know this, but for us, if we have that, then our scope of the work goes way more smoothly. If we don't have that, we end up, it's sort of like a pyramid. We end up building a design on a false foundation. And at some point it causes problems. And that's often I have seen, that's part of the reason why sometimes when you get later on into design, like let's say significantly through SD or maybe even beyond that, there's a shift and the client says, I want to change this dramatically. And you realize it's because we didn't actually have that conversation at the beginning of what are the goals.
Well said. I like how you said that. Yeah, designing on a false foundation. It seems pretty trivial and simple, but I think establishing those goals and objectives and the why early on is just so critical. And then tracking back to that at every stage of the project, right? Because like you said, after SD, you cruise into design development, the DD phase, and you're collaborating with like an entire design team to further that chosen design concept. There's specialists and systems and consultants and all this jazz that go into it, and that thin plan set starts to get a little bit thicker, right? And then it gets real thick when you get into CDs, right? And if you change something there, there's just like a massive reverberation through the whole plan set that's really disruptive, expensive, and time consuming.
So before design starts, you described kind of the conversations you would have with the client. You're putting together the team or helping them do that. During concept design, are you guys typically sitting in and being present during concept design and schematic design meetings and giving your, I guess, opinions or thoughts on whether or not design option A or B is better or worse? Or how does that go?
Yeah, we definitely sit in on design meetings. I think to be able to properly lead and oversee a project, we have to be, involved in the design process for sure. Mainly from a budget and schedule perspective. We try our best to stay in our lane as an owner's rep, right? We're not the architects. We're happy to leverage our data and our expertise from our 10 years of projects and our 100 plus current projects now. Some clients and architects want to understand what other people are doing or what Peak thinks about things, but we really leave it to the architect to lead the design with the client, and we'll comment if or as needed throughout that process. But we really want to empower the architect to lead and manage that.
Yeah. So I asked that question because I can feel the architects listening thinking, I do not want another person in that room saying, well, I think the blue one's better.
No, that's not what we're saying for sure.
No, but I could see how it's super beneficial for us to kind of also have an understanding of, the reality of the ideas that we're proposing.
Yeah,
because
100%.
Oftentimes there is a huge gap between what architects have in mind and what actually is feasible. So I think having that check and balance, as you move through is super important in being efficient and being efficient in terms of creativity, right? Putting the effort where you know things are going to be possible.
Yeah. I think, great architects do an amazing job at defining the program with the client, right?
Yeah.
Everyone has unique experiences. So I think the best teams leverage everyone's experience, right? And I've yet to met someone who knows everything, right? So I think it's awesome when everyone can kind of get along and leverage everyone's expertise. We're working on some projects where the architects are very strong in the design, but in the systems, he actually has more experience. And we're helping them ask about backup power, redundant backup power systems, off-grid capabilities, security, IT, AV type stuff that we're seeing on other complex projects, and asking the architect and client, hey, other people are doing this. Is this of interest to you? Right. And those are questions that the architect didn't ask. Right.
Yeah.
And so we're being helpful in making sure the owner knows all the potential options they have so they can make the best informed decision.
I like that point because it ties back into, in my view, the complexity of projects. And it's one of the reasons why we love taking the collaborative approach to working with other professionals and working with other and sometimes even new professionals, is because if everyone's cool, then you get to share information. And a contractor we're working with, they have, a lot of times there's a lot of older contractors who've done lots of projects, a lot of different types of projects, and it's just a resource. It's like, hey, we've done this detail a bunch of times, it works, but take a look at it. Do you have a better way of doing it? Because as an architecture, again, you mentioned these projects take so long, right? There's a cap to how many projects we can take on versus kind of the people power.
Well, and custom homes are also very unique. So every time it's kind of it's a different recipe in some way, right? Like there is always new things you can learn depending on what the design wants to be, where it's happening. If it's in a state where there is snow or in a place where there is no snow, it comes back to
that's true.
Like there is a lot of different things to know about.
Yeah, definitely. I think where we've been helpful there too is, we're doing projects across North America where one project, the architect may only have experience in warm weather climates, and they're doing a project in Tahoe or in a high alpine environment, and they don't know the nuances of designing in such a place, right? And if they're open, Pete can help inform them of best practices in those environments, right? So we can kind of help elevate architects as needed in different projects and just help them be successful in areas where they may not have the most current experience.
Yeah, it's funny. This is sort of an aside in a sense, but because we practice on the East Coast and the West Coast, we have a pretty good sense of those two climates and like snow and things like this.
Even just gutters.
Gutters.
A lot of California homes don't even have gutter. I don't get that.
And, having like an airspace behind siding and all this kind of stuff. But what I was going to say is that sometimes I hear, stories of an architect who is used to practicing, as you said, in one climate, let's say a moderate climate, and then they're doing a house in Truckee or something. And they also, for whatever reason, them or the client have decided to hire a contractor who also doesn't have experience in that area. And then sometimes also an engineer who doesn't do engineering in that area. And I'm like, if it works out, then hats off to all four of you. But if it doesn't, and there's problems, which you probably will have in that case, then I don't know why you did that. I would not, speaking as an architect, if I were practicing it in a place where I wasn't familiar with, my first instinct would be to not hire a GC who does not do work there. Because the GC is the one who builds the things and they know best practices, and I wouldn't want them or an owner's rep or somebody who was local when it comes, especially when we're talking about construction, the detailing, keeping water out and all that kind of stuff. I don't want to mess around with trying to reinvent the wheel in a new place. And just, I don't need that.
Totally. If that were to happen, that's when a client, I think, just didn't do a great job selecting a contractor, didn't do a great job selecting the team and putting them together to give the project the highest chance of success.
Yeah, and in the team structure, the way I see it too is that there is more. How do I put it? More flexibility, or it's easier for an architect to do work in different places.
Definitely.
It's not to say the architect is not responsible for thinking through the construction aspects of a project or the engineering or whatever else, but the engineer does the engineering, the contractor is in charge of constructing it. So that's a benefit for us. We can work in a bunch of places.
Yeah. And you can work remotely too. A contractor can't.
Yeah, that's true. A contractor
it's a bit more complicated.
Yeah. Similar to your business model, the owner's rep business model, or at least ours, is more fluid like that, right? Like we can pick up and manage projects kind of anywhere, right? And travel like you as needed, where obviously a GC needs to have more of a localized presence in terms of people, equipment, et cetera, to do work. So it's definitely harder for any GC to scale quickly or go to new markets effectively. There are some who already have that infrastructure who do it well, but it's really hard for the average local contractor to kind of to scale and go to somewhere different.
Yeah. And the amount of call it building science knowledge they accumulate when they work in a specific territory is so deep too that it's a weird thing for us. A lot of architects will say that we're kind of generalists. Like we know a little about we know a little about a lot of things. Yeah. But getting back to the process. So we left off at DD, but I did have a question of project budgets, right? So in the initial conversations with the client, there's always the construction budget. Like, what is your construction cost you have in mind? And then a lot of times that's used as a way to give an estimate as to the other fees. And on top of that, for example, the architect's fee being between, let's say, 10 to 15 as a rough average. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it really shouldn't be less than 10%, but let's say 10 to 15, engineers are like 1 to 2% of project costs. But from a client's perspective, are there other things in the project budget that they should be mindful of that are not just the construction costs, the architect, the engineer, and the designer?
Yeah, definitely. In the early phases, in even acquisition or say in concept or schematic design, we do a high level preliminary development budget, and we like to break it down into soft costs. Those are costs from the architect, engineer, owner's rep, etc. Hard costs, which are general contractor costs, site or landscaping costs, which are typically under the GC, but we like to break it out. Furniture, FF&E, and those are kind of the 4 big buckets, right? But then there are also miscellaneous owner costs like builder's risk or project insurance. And then we always like to add a line for contingency, unforeseen conditions, scope changes, et cetera, over the course of the project, and escalation, market escalation. And so that's kind of how we typically like to build a budget. In the early stages of a project, right, you have limited information. So your budget's only as good as your information. So we start with a range based on historical data and current project data. And as the plan set gets more defined, our budget gap or range narrows. That's kind of how the progression of our budgets work on projects.
Is there a typical contingency amount that you suggest for projects? I know that's a tough one because things vary.
Early on, it's typically 10%. We've increased it if there are larger risks at play. But that's kind of typical. And then you can kind of reduce that as the project gets more defined.
Gotcha.
And now a quick break to thank the sponsors who support the second studio.
Spreadsheets can't bring your designs to life, but Programma can. Say hello to a bespoke integrated software suite built by and for experienced architecture and design professionals. Use your Pinterest image library to build collaborative mood boards, then turn them into shared online presentations with a click using Programma's pin boards. Use the Programma Web Clipper to build a centralized specification library for your studio. Share always up-to-date specifications and product schedules schedules with clients, trades, and colleagues by generating beautiful, branded, live links and client dashboards. Programa's clean, minimal interface allows your work to shine. Start for free and save 25% on annual plans at programa.design/Second Studio.
Architects and interior designers, if you're looking to elevate your workflow, then we suggest using the BIM computer program ArchiCAD. ArchiCAD leads the industry by enabling architectural and interior design firms around the world to 3D design, supported by innovative technology that expands as far as the imagination can stretch. As ArchiCAD continues to evolve with technological advances, architects can push that technology to their advantage while working in an accurate model. You can start your free, fully functioning trial today by clicking the link in our episode notes.
So then going back to the process, so we left off, during SD, you're getting a rough order of magnitudes from contractors, rough estimates, let's say. And then once we get into DD, what is your role when we're in design development?
Yeah, totally. So it's kind of similar to what we said before, right? So in DD, we're collaborating and leading a larger team of design professionals, to further develop that SD design. Like you said, we're obtaining updated pricing and schedule information. And then as we cruise into CDs, that's kind of finalizing the design, right? We're reviewing the final construction documents prepared by the design team, assisting the architect to make sure they're fully coordinated and meeting the client's goals. And then we are assisting with the preparation of the bid package and procurement documents for contractors. Mm-hmm. Then typically in a bidding and contractor selection process, the OR is going to manage that bidding process, right? We're going to issue the invitations to bid, evaluate those bids, and do side-by-side comparisons, make sure things are apples to apples. So you're looking at them fairly. We'll then help the team the design team and client make an informed decision, an informed objective decision based on the pricing and the proposed team, et cetera. We'll then help negotiate the GC contract on behalf of the client. At that time too, we'll help the client procure necessary insurance for the project. Mm-hmm. And then we'll coordinate with legal counsel to review and finalize that GC contract. Kind of the next phase is typically, a permitting phase. And we're going to work again with the team to ensure the project or the plans comply with, building codes, zoning regulations, environmental requirements, other permitting criteria. And then we'll help coordinate, the preparation and submission of the permit application. Let's say that gets approved, we're cruising into the construction phase with, finalized drawings and a GC on board, right? And in that phase is when we're kind of overseeing the construction process alongside the architect who's performing CA, construction administration, to ensure that the contractor's work is carried out in accordance to the plans, specs, and, the owner and our quality standards, right? Similar to an architect, an OR is conducting regular site visits, usually coincide with an owner architect contractor meeting or a big pay app to review the work in place. And we're just there to monitor progress, quality, what have you. We're actively participating in coordination meetings in that phase as well, in addition to the OAC meeting. And in that phase, we're addressing and resolving issues and conflicts and change orders that arise during construction. I think the GCs will like this. A big thing that we do in construction is we ensure quick payment to GCs and vendors. Like that's a big thing that the owner holds that can really affect the project. If you can pay your people and especially your GC quickly, keeping the money flowing, keeps the interest level high and keeps the GC hungry and engaged to continue putting work in quickly on your project.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because it reminds me that there is a lot of times in a project where the professionals, let's say the architect, designer, contractor, want to convey information to the client that is just objectively helpful, good information, But again, I find it's not always easy for a client to just take it and just go with it, because there's that they're not non-biased, as you put it. And I guess it's basically reemphasizing that point of being a non-biased third party is just super beneficial, because you're really acting as a trusted agent of the client. And I feel like they could trust you, because why else would you be advocating for this thing? It doesn't affect whether or not you make money.
Yep. Well said. No, we're doing that a lot with the teams during construction, mainly, change order management. We all know that that's going to happen. And so we have a good process in place to kind of let everyone understand what that is. And when they come through, make sure that they have all the sufficient information, right? Here's the original cost, base budget, the new base budget, why it changed, how it changed, et cetera, very clearly laid out in email form. And our goal is to send it and get an approval, right? One and done, and not have multiple emails back and forth or multiple meetings to discuss things, right? That doesn't help, make the process more efficient. If it's a fair change order, we need to process it quickly and efficiently and get on with our work, right? And that's what we're trying to do, is just make the whole process in construction more efficient for all the team members, including the client.
Are you guys often reviewing pay applications and reviewing the work for that with the architect, or are you doing it on your own, do you find?
No, our preferred process is to kind of take the majority of that work off the architect's plate. We're reviewing for mathematical accuracy, correct backup, liens, waivers, et cetera, and then reviewing the work in place, and then serving it up to the architect and saying, hey, Peak Projects has reviewed this. We would also like you to review it as well, because typically in AI contracts, the architect sometimes signs the pay app as well. But we like to collectively do that together, but with Peak doing the majority of the heavy lifting, making it easier on the architect.
Nice. That's one specific aspect of the whole process during construction that I think was much more common for the architect to lead and do on their own. But and in some ways it makes sense because we want to review the work, but in other ways, more and more architects are like, really truthfully, at the end of the day, if I didn't have to do that or do the bulk of the work, I'd be happy not having to look into all the stuff you mentioned and just focus on the thing. I mean, there's different types of architects for sure, but And
it creates also a weird dynamic, I think, between the architect and the contractor, because it's
we'd rather
like,
blame the
these
owner's
guys
rep for the
reviewing
problems.
my work, and I mean, it's just a little bit awkward. Going back quickly on the cost, I mean, I think one of the questions that probably our listeners would have is that how does the professional fee of hiring an OR works? Is it a percentage of construction? Is it a fixed fee? Is it an hourly? Like, what is maybe more typical in your field?
Oh, and then also on top of that, what is the typical fee in total if we were to think of it as a percentage of the project cost?
You got it. We typically tell our clients, an OR fee can be 2 to 6% of hard costs. And that's depending on at what time in the project we're hired, the needs of the owner, quality of the team, and number of iterations. So that's what we typically kind of say. Holistically, we're seeing soft costs on a project kind of between 25 and 35% of hard costs. And, our fee kind of falls into that, in addition to the architect, ID, structural, et cetera. So it really depends on the projects, on all the aspects of the project that kind of ultimately determines our fee.
That makes sense.
And we bill, to answer your other part of your question, we bill hourly. We feel like it's a disalignment of incentives to charge a percentage on the project cost. And so if we're really representing our owner in their best interest, we need to bill hourly.
Yeah. I think it goes back to efficiency. I mean, if the client is efficient in making their decision, and then you pay for what you need, and no more and no less.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I mean, we have this debate often about hourly versus fixed versus percentage, but there is it's a funny thing as when I am contracting with someone and I'm paying someone else, I actually like hourly, which sounds nuts because most people don't like hourly, right? Because it's going to bleed on. But I just like knowing that if they are working, they're being paid. I don't like the idea that I'm underpaying them. That's actually my biggest concern. I don't like taking advantage of people. And also, of course, I don't want to overpay necessarily either. Yeah. But I think in your case, especially keeping it divorced from the construction costs makes sense. Yeah. I mean, I know some architects, and I think it used to be a thing that was more popular, where their fee is based on a percentage of the hard costs. And but a lot of architects say they don't want to do that because of the conflict of interest it creates.
Yep. We've definitely seen that shift in the industry where, a while back it was always, 10, 15 or whatever percent of hard costs. And now we're seeing it hourly, with a rough estimate based on a percentage of the project, but it's billed hourly.
Yeah. There's just, and to your point, the reason why that is, it's because it's just hard to know how many iterations are going to take place. It'll go, as you said, for you guys from 2 to 6%, from us 2 to 15, to 10 to 15% or whatever, based on how long we're doing revisions. And again, that goes back to the importance of the first questions that you had mentioned of what are your goals for this project, and let's build on this kind of pyramid of information instead of just winging it and going with shooting from the hip and going with the first people you find on Yelp or whatever it was.
Yes, well said.
So during construction, you guys are visiting the site. You talked about that. I guess after construction, the client moves in. Are you guys still involved? And if so, in what capacity typically?
Yeah. So taking a step back at the end of the construction phase, right, there's the closeout or turnover phase. And we're working, as you know, feverishly with everyone at the end of a project to facilitate, the completion of construction. We're commissioning the systems, training either the client or the client's team on how to operate the home. There's the review and approval of final project deliverables, your as-built drawings, operation manuals, warranties. We're working with vendors to create a digital and tangible manual for the client so they can reference, information about the project quickly. Obviously, we're working with you and the GC to ensure all the punch list items are addressed and resolved to our client satisfaction. And that's kind of like the closeout phase of the project and making sure, everything's perfect, art's on the wall, everything's dialed so they can move in and start operating it or using it as they wish, right? And then we're also ensuring that all the proper maintenance contracts and service items that need to happen after move-in, because once a project is done, it's really not done. And that's like a common misconception some clients have, right? Like when you invest 10, 20, 30, $100 million into a home, like there's a significant ongoing effort that takes place to maintain that asset so it looks and operates like it does when the architects and OR approve the project, right? And so we're helping with that. We did last year start an estate management division. And so we have folks in New York, San Francisco, and LA that are actually helping clients post-construction on a fractional basis, manage maintenance and operations of the home kind of in perpetuity.
Yeah,
that makes sense. I mean, it's like you buy a nice car, you need to get it checked once in a while, change the oil, change the filters. I mean, if you want to keep it nice.
That is something that most people underestimate or if they completely forget about.
And I think also in terms of cost, right? Like you have to factor those maintenance costs over time too as part of probably the total project cost.
Definitely. Yeah, you definitely should.
The maintenance costs, and also, and this is funny, I was talking with someone recently, and there's a client who completed a new large house, very expensive, and that was a result of they recently, became very wealthy kind of overnight, so to speak, tech money. And they did not realize the utility bill was going to be so much per month. And the professional team was like, well, yeah, you're not living in a studio apartment anymore. Like, this is a giant house. Like, if you run the water and the electricity, it's going to be a lot more than the $200 you were paying a month beforehand. And most of it remind you though, that a lot of the contractors that we've spoken with and we know, they also have dedicated, call them like maintenance teams, or sometimes they're called special division teams that do maintenance and also small projects for repeat clients or for new ones in odd situations.
Yeah, we work with a lot of those teams. Our estate management division will oversee or work with those teams on clients' projects, to help ensure success.
Nice. There was another thing you said early on a few times, which I thought was interesting, is helping clients compare apples to apples when they're considering contractors or architects. And I want to pick up on that because one of the things that is really challenging about the the residential construction space is that a lot of contractors practice very differently from other contractors, and architects practice very differently. And the scope of services they provide is sometimes radically different from another architect. And so what we see from our side is that we are oftentimes having to explain to clients, tell them, like, make sure you are comparing apples to apples. Like, understand if you bid it out to 3 contractors, you have one that's high, middle, and low. And let's say the low one is significantly lower, it's for a reason. And it's not just because they're a bad person or they don't do good work. It's probably because quantifiably they're leaving out work. The same thing with an architect, to be honest.
Yeah, well said. So we're big on making information clearly digestible, so you can make actionable decisions based on it quickly, right? Because our clients have limited time, right? So we need to present things like they get presented in a boardroom, right? And so we're big on clear and effective communication. So we do well in that. I think going to the contractor question, I think oftentimes people pick contractors just based on cost, right? Which is just like one tiny element in the responsible decision-making process, right? Like, the way we help clients pick or select contractors is through a pretty detailed RFQ process, request for qualifications. We want to understand everything about them, right? We want to check their credentials, their experience on similar projects, their organizational and management structure, their financial stability. We want to review portfolios and past projects. We're calling and checking references. We're considering their communication and collaboration style. We're reviewing their deliverables. I want to see how dialed their meeting minutes are, what their schedules look like, what their different budget formats are, RFI submittal process, mock-up requests, et cetera, right? We're big on evaluating the proposed project team, right? We want to ask for resumes of who's going to be on your project. Like, oftentimes it's the owner selling the project, but you don't know who the PM, super, PE, foreman, et cetera, are going to be. Like, you need to know that before signing a contract with a contractor. Then going to the financial part, right? Understanding their contract terms, like what are their hourly rates, their fee percentage, their division one, how are they going to manage the project? Like that's an important thing to look at when you're trying to figure out who's going to be more expensive than the other. Because at the high end residential level, GCs are a lot of the time are using the same subs, right? So it's about how they themselves are going to manage the project. And that's what, clients need to really determine and hone in on. Clients, should also visit ongoing projects, right? Walk up, is the site clean, organized? Are there subs on site? Is it like a well-oiled thing? Right? You got to see it to believe it. I think where architects can play a big role as well as us is, you can ask about their preferred subcontractors. Good architects know good subcontractors, right? And so like if they're talking the same language, if they know the same people you do, that's a good sign. Going down the list, we got to check warranties and post-construction support. Like those are big things. Like if and when stuff goes wrong, how does that work and how do they deal with it? Um, and a question I really like to ask is like, understand how they would creatively manage your project. Like, not all projects are the same, right? Like, some projects have multiple access points, increased laydown area, um, this and that. Each project has like unique uh, optionality to be creative with from a contractor's perspective, right?
Right.
And good contractors are creative.
Yeah.
And I think, like, last but not least, personality alignment. Like, do you get a good vibe from them? They share similar values. Like I said before, can you spend 2, 3, 4, 5 years with this team?
That's
Those are like
yeah.
some of the many things that, you got to look at when selecting anyone on your team.
Yeah.
And what's funny about that is, usually it's some of the many things, but for most folks, for most clients, that's already an overwhelming list of things, for sure. That's the case. And I can see where having a person who's going to do that on their behalf, who they trust has to start somewhere, is very beneficial. Because especially a lot of folks who have a lot of money, they're busy. They don't have the time or sometimes the interest at all to be running around and doing all this research. And I like what you said earlier too about something like distilling information so it's concise, so that the client can actually make an informed decision, but not have to spend a month out of their year doing all of the work. And to be honest, that's something that we're always trying to further refine and better, because sometimes I feel at the beginning of the project that I feel this urge to convey the whole Bible of information to the client, but in reality you can't do that because there's not time to do it. And so anyway, I think that's an interesting way to frame that particular problem.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned this before, but if we do that well, and if we do that well with collaboration from all the team members, we do believe that leads to like less stuff that you guys have to do as well, right?
Yeah.
If we all can get decisions made quickly and approvals signed off quickly, it's just less email comms traffic that we all have to deal with. So if we can communicate things clearly and effectively once, and that is good for the client, but really good for all of us in the project team.
Yeah, for sure. It's a funny thing too. I think that I think sometimes it's easy for folks to forget that the architect and the contractor also want things to run as smoothly and as efficiently as possible.
Totally.
In our case, throughout the project, but I was specifically thinking about design. Like, I have no interest in staying in SD for a year. That doesn't interest me. I mean, I love designing,
you don't want to be a
yes,
paper architect?
but I'm not a paper architect, and all of us are trying to get stuff built as if things take long enough already, like as efficiently as possible. And so there's actually, I think, more alignment between the architect, contractor, and client than maybe people think. Like, I'm not trying to draw out the process. I don't want to do that. And oftentimes the thing that slows down the design phase, which is the phase where it's the most unpredictable in a sense, I have to say it's the client. If they take a month to get back to us, well, that's a month off the schedule. And if that has to be the case because they're on vacation or something happened, that is what it is. But, clients basically should recognize that that's the case. Like, we will outproduce you. I guarantee it. We'll be ready for the next meeting, but we'll be waiting for 2 or 3 weeks or whatever it is. I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah.
No, I agree. And you said it well. You said it well. And that's what I think why a lot of industry partners, really value us, is we're holding our clients' feet to the fire and helping them make decisions. And if they don't, informing them the budget and schedule ramifications of not making decisions, right?
Right.
Like, that's one of the key things we manage at the beginning of a project. I talked about the macro budget, but there's also the macro or global schedule, right? That goes from acquisition through design, through permitting, through construction, through turnover, right? We're working with the team early on to set a realistic design and construction schedule. I think what we see often is people produce or issue a standard schedule that might not fit that particular client. Maybe that's what the architect sees as how they want to run it, or but we want to give the client, a feasible, reasonable schedule, right? If we know they travel a lot or they're gone every summer, like you got to put that into the design schedule, and let's all give ourselves the appropriate breathing room to execute correctly. So we don't have to go back to the well and ask for more when we blow the schedule. So it's really important to like work collaboratively together in the beginning to establish a realistic budget based on that client.
Yep. That's super well said. Go ahead.
Okay.
I was going to ask, so some questions about projects in general. So construction costs, I know this would be a question that clients would love to have the answer to, is everyone says that construction costs always go up during a project. It always ends up being more than what everyone anticipates it to be. Why is that the case?
Yes, good question. I think construction projects, at least in the last couple of years, have just been going up in general. I also think, more directly to your question, I think there hasn't always been great budgeting early on or throughout the entire process. But why it always goes up, I think, is especially in today's age, people are fast tracking projects, right? They're starting projects with not complete information. And so there are allowances or placeholders in a budget. And those get reconciled as the scope gets defined and the project gets bought out. It's been a while since I've done a project where you've had 100% CDs, priced it, and then started construction, right? You're getting that permit approval, issuing a permit set, and then going into construction. But you only have 25% CD pricing at that time. There's still a lot of unknowns, like I said. And so the reason budgets get blown is because the design continues to iterate and throughout the construction process. And I think that kind of leads to budget overages, et cetera. Because if you design through the construction process, you always are kind of enhancing it. Clients typically choose higher end products than what the baseline budget was accommodating. And all that stuff kind of leads to budget overages on projects these days, especially in the high end residential world. Yeah,
that's well said. And it's something also that it's surprising to me how many people don't know that a permit drawing set is not a construction document set. They are not even in our space. They're not even close to being the same. But most folks, they are identical, and I'm like, no, they are not. I'm sorry, they are not. There's a lot more information that needs to happen.
Yes, well said.
So I'm sure you worked on a lot of very complex projects, but is there one that kind of stands out as, maybe like one that is just very challenging or very exciting, or just one that kind of like stands out from all of the ones you've worked on? If you can share information, because I know there's NDAs.
No, it's hard to pick one. We actually have a few right now that are under NDA, but are very ambitious. We have an extremely large ranch project at a very high elevation in Colorado. It's logistically challenging just to get people to the site, much less quality labor and high-end materials to the actual site, much less the build site, which is at 10,000 plus feet in elevation.
Wow.
So that logistically is going to be super challenging, but super fun to figure out. We have a great team on that. So I'm excited for that one, but that one's, very different. Another one, we have a really cool, complicated penthouse project in New York. Similar challenging access, but not the same as a large Colorado ranch, like limited elevator access and geometry, within the peak of the structure. Yeah. And so that one's going to be really cool from, an urban project perspective. And then I alluded to it earlier, this really large project in Florida. In Florida, there's weather, hurricane rated products. We're utilizing super large, unique windows and a lot of stone. And that design is just going to be really complex to execute with all the constraints in Florida at the speed that the client wants to do it in.
Well, it sounds for the
always
first two, maybe you need to partner with some helicopter company, you know.
Yes.
10,000
we did
feet
look at
altitude.
some elevator companies for that Colorado, or some helicopter companies for that Colorado project.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
we shall
subs will
see.
have to be like supreme athletes to work in those
I
kind
was
of
gonna say-
conditions, oxygen masks to construct this.
Well,
Yeah, it'd take a while to acclimate.
Yeah.
Take a while to acclimate for sure.
Like in cases like this, do you like have to kind of like talk to the locals to try and find if there is like, I don't know, like maybe like local people that would be best suited for that, or strategies on how to bring stuff up there? Like, how do you brainstorm solutions for those types of challenges?
Definitely. Leverage the team, right? Hire the best and brightest and leverage them. On that Colorado project, we have an amazing architect and general contractor, and in the coordination meetings, we're kind of laying out all the challenges and seeing what people have to offer, and leveraging a lot of experience. Our regional principal in the Mountain West, has a ton of experience, and his personal experience is very leveraged on that project to help. And in those projects, we try to leverage as much local talent as we can, that can meet the project goals and the design parameters. But when we can't, then we leverage outside resources and have to transport them in to accomplish the project.
Yeah.
So we're going to ask the fun question. I'm going to go back to asking the other questions. So what would be your advice for a client who's going to embark on a project, but they want to, as best as they can, control the construction costs? I mean, I don't want to use the word control as in control, but control to a degree, and also the schedule, and not have them get blown up.
Yes. Good question. Advice for a client, I think, again, I'm going to sound like beating a dead horse, but you got to establish the goals and objectives of the project, and you got to talk about budget and schedule early, and define your appetite for those. You need to fully design the project, and then not change your mind during construction. I think if you fully design the project, and that project is well priced, well pre-planned for, you will have limited budget and schedule issues during construction. But when you change the scope during construction, that leads to budget and schedule changes.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a ripple effect, right? You change this one thing on the design drawing, then all of the consultants, the timeline, everything just gets impacted. Yeah.
And the GC is then focusing on that change instead of putting the predetermined work in place.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we also see a similar issue when construction starts based on a very loose, incomplete set of construction documents. And it's so common, and I think it's because everyone wants to move quickly, and the misconception that clients have is that to have a project go quicker and be completed quicker is to start sooner, start construction sooner. And from the outside, I can understand why someone would think that. But from the insider's perspective, that's not the case. There was a phrase you used earlier on in the conversation, which was mitigating mistakes, mitigating something. And I like that because I find that the key to project success all around, but if we're talking about budget and schedule specifically, is to just do a little bit of work, spend some money and time now to save huge during construction. Folks are always so eager to start demolition, to start pouring foundations. And maybe it sounds counterintuitive, but holding out for that extra couple of months or whatever period of time to have a full design, and then therefore have accurate pricing and an accurate schedule, it just makes it better. And also, by the way, it's way less stressful for everybody, including the client, I might add,
Yeah, definitely. That's the way to do it if you can. But as you guys know, it's hard to get clients to accept that.
Another thing I was wondering is, what do you think of the business model design build? And maybe that's kind of a tricky question for you because you work with both sides separately. So I don't know if you've ever work on project while it's one entity doing both, and I'm sure that was probably very interesting. But what are your thoughts on design build?
Design build for the listeners, it's kind of like you said, it's a project delivery method where a single entity is responsible for both the design and construction phases. I think it's more commonly used in commercial buildings, infrastructure projects, large residential developments. It's not as common in high-end private residential in that space.
Yeah.
I think generally the efficiencies are like a single point of responsibility. You get early collaboration with them being one and the same. And I think they speak to kind of efficiencies and time savings. But I think, high-end residential projects demand such a high level of architectural expertise and creativity. And that's usually found in standalone architecture firms and not design build firms. I will say Marmol Radziner is one of the only firms I'm aware that does design build well at the ultra high-end level.
Yeah. That's interesting to hear your thoughts on that, because we see the same things, broadly speaking. It's just, and there's a distinction also. A lot of the design build companies, or how do I put this? I think a design build company that is founded and led by a builder is typically very different from a design build company that was founded and led by an architect. Like Marmol Radziner, they do great work, and they're both architects. They both went to Cal Poly, my school, in fact, before my time, obviously. But and that there's, of course, that any person who has a business knows this. It's the person or people at the top that it trickles down to everything else and everything they do. And so generally I find that when a design build company is led by a contractor, the design excellence is not at the level that you're describing. I'm not hating on them. I'm not saying they can't do good work, but it's just not quite the same.
Yeah. No, that definitely tracks.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was wondering, we might have listeners, architects who are thinking, hey, you know what? Maybe being an owner's rep sounds really good.
Are you going to ask them if they're looking to hire?
Well, I mean, sure. No, but I was wondering, is there like your path toward where you're doing today? You kind of went through, a deviated path maybe, or maybe there is no direct path. But I was wondering if now in 2024, is there like a specific training that people can get in school to become an owner's rep? Or is it more of this kind of like loose, fluid path that one would end upon depending on, opportunities and experience and choices?
Who would be on paper like a good profile to perform as a good owner's rep?
Yeah. I think in the past it's been a little more fluid. I think it's getting a little bit more straightforward to become an owner's rep. It's, not a requirement, but definitely helpful to have, an educational background in architecture, construction management, or engineering. You definitely, at least to get hired at Peak, you need to have architecture, construction, or project management experience, ideally in the high-end residential space. I think folks with hospitality and commercial experience can do well if they have the right personality and EQ. Good owners reps need excellent communication skills. They need to know how to negotiate, have strong risk management skills, obviously super strong budgeting and financial management skills, schedule management skills, proficiency with technology. Those are all, things that really are needed to be a good owner's rep. But the best, have experience in that area that they're ORing per se. I think it's just really important to have experience, be kind and respectful, and again have that high EQ, because at the end of the day, you're there to kind of lead and shepherd the project along, and you got to be able to work with all different types of people, read the room, and be able to move things forward for everyone.
Yeah, it's a lot of different qualities to a person, but the experience part is interesting, because I think it could be easy for folks to feel like, well, if I'm a kind person and if I'm, empathetic and I know how to read a room and I'm also driven, then that's enough for me to be on my own, be an owner's rep successfully. And I think to your point, those qualities are necessary, but I just have a hard time envisioning that individual I described being successful if they don't have any actual knowledge and experience in architecture or construct. I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, no, really agree that you have to understand how things are built and the process behind it, right? You have to understand the different phases of design, the players involved, basic pitfalls of all projects, project management theory, and construction, how things get built, right? And, on our team, we have folks from, like myself, the family office world, who were very involved in every aspect of projects. We have licensed GCs and architects on staff that, these architects have designed projects prior to coming to peak, have executed CA. Contractors have been involved in pre-con and construction. We do have a couple engineers and, ex-sustainability consultants who have had exposure and experience with all processes and phases and stages of construction projects. And like you said, you really need that real experience and understanding of the work to be able to advise effectively on it.
My last question, from a client's perspective, or a question that would be helpful for the clients, and you maybe already covered it, but what would be like the 3 most important pieces of information or advice you would give to a client who's embarking on a new project, and assuming they don't have experience in any of this?
Yeah. Invest time in comprehensive project planning, right? Set project goals and budgets, define the why of the project. Like you said, really build the business plan of the project. Secondly, talk budget and schedule early and often. Like define a budget and schedule, even if you're okay if that modulates, right? Mm-hmm. You got to have a baseline and then track it as it goes up or goes down. So there's a history of it, and a log on how and why it changed, right? And then, last but not least, you got to build an experienced, high-performing team. So invest time in project planning, talk budget and schedule, hire a great team.
Yeah, awesome. Another question, which we didn't cover but would be useful, is what types of projects or clients would require an owner's representative? Because I know obviously you guys operate at the high tier and also the extremely, extremely high tier. And people might be wondering, well, do I need to be spending $20 million in order to have an owner's rep? Is it only that tier of project that requires this layer of oversight that an owner rep provides?
Got it. No, I think, any type of project type could require an owner's rep. Commercial, healthcare, cultural, hospitality, historical, high-end residential. I think any client who's embarking on a complex project wants professional third-party management, mm-hmm. Appreciates, saving time, and wants the project to be, delivered in a textbook world-class way, right? So I think there's all types of projects that can require an owner's rep, and a client who values those things, like I said, would make a great fit for an owner's rep.
Yeah, I like that point. Because it's not just about the project itself. It's really about the client and who they are. If they like things to be run a certain way, then it could be beneficial, even if it's a smaller size project.
Definitely.
You guys have been, working in many different states, like you mentioned, and you have also projects overseas. Is there a desire to grow overseas more? Is it common even in other countries to have owners rep, or is it more of a U.S. type of profession?
First, yeah, I would love, ever since I started Peak, I've always wanted to just help different types of people. And so we've been fortunate enough to help a lot of people on a lot of cool projects, you know, in all the places I mentioned. It would be amazing to help in Europe on projects. So we would love to open an office there and start work there. And then from there, kind of see where that takes us. But I really think that there's an endless opportunity for clients we could help, given what we do all around the world.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of where it exists and where it doesn't, you know, I think I'm gonna guess that, you know, on the West Coast, maybe 20% of projects have an owner's rep. As you move east, that number increases.
Yeah.
I've talked with a lot of family office folks, and this and that, and I think they attribute that to just governance of wealth, right? The governance level that clients take out east is just higher than that out west. Again, could be a generalization, but it's typically older money, and they just kind of protect and manage their money a little bit more thoroughly than new money, right? In London, it's just a known thing. You hire a project manager before you hire anyone, like no questions asked.
Really?
Right. So, you know, as you trend to, you know, older places, you know, the governance goes up, and so does the existence of owners reps.
So you just have to keep going east, it sounds like.
That might be the plan.
Eventually you come back around.
I mean, speaking from our,
interesting.
our experience in New York City, it makes sense. I mean, who knows with these kinds of things, but that seems to track based on what we've seen and experienced as well. I want to know, what is the most challenging part of your job, as maybe not so much as a business owner, although that as well, but as an owner's rep, like, what's the most difficult thing?
The most frustrating thing, I think, with our teams right now is just like opaque and opaque building departments. You know, with limited information, right? I know it's pretty specific, but we like to foster this open, collaborative environment. You know, we expect all of our partners to collaborate back in the same manner, which everyone usually does, sometimes except for them.
Yep, they're the brick wall.
I feel like that's the next person we need to get on the show, is like a plan shaker, you know, the people who actually approve drawings.
Yeah, I know. We've thought about that. I'm just...
If you know one,
I'm afraid. I don't know.
I do know some. And I was going to say, I don't like to... We always Peak, myself, like to bring solutions too. So even though that's a problem, we mitigate that problem by good land use attorneys who specialize in entitlements, or permit or entitlement consultants. So we have relationships with lots of those folks in lots of different areas to try to help mitigate permit risks. Yeah.
And I feel like that's another specific role and kind of part of the overall project that is becoming worse, but also as a result has produced a reliance on specific professionals that you mentioned to solve those problems. Yeah. It's interesting to see how many more professionals are hired now, like specifically for certain things, to solve certain things. But the building departments. I should have known that was going to be the answer. I mean, you ask any architect or contractor, that's the answer.
We just talked about it yesterday, because you even sometimes look for information, you cannot find the legal information you need in order to
you call,
put your drawings.
Answer. You really do need someone who is just basically buddy, and that's all they do.
Yeah. Who've done it before, know the people. Yep. Exactly.
The final question that of course we always ask is, what is your favorite building?
That's awesome. Thank you. Again, it's hard, man. There's so many. Is it cool if I give you a couple?
Yeah. And they don't have to be projects you've done. They can be non-biased projects.
Awesome. Cool. A classic. I like the Pierre by Olsen Kundig. That's a
Hmm.
great one. It's in
Yeah.
this amazing cove on Lopez Island up in the San Juans, kind of nestled into the landscape, into this rock. There's great photos of it online if folks want to check it out. That's a good one. My wife is from Seattle, and so I've spent time in the San Juans and have seen it, and just love that area of the world. And just a beautiful place.
Yeah.
We're actually doing a really cool project out west with Walker Warner, that upon completion, will be up there with one of my favorites. It's an amazing program. The detailing is awesome. Beautiful concrete work. And the ski in, ski out access doesn't hurt either. I'm biased to that. Another cool one I really like is the Matagori House in New Zealand. It was by Farron Hay, a really cool firm out of New Zealand. It sits at the base of this mountain range at like the edge of a lake. Again, it's integrated into the landscape super well. There's like these interesting masonry massing. It has local engineered timber, and it has this really cool tussock rounded green roof. You got to check it out. That's a good one.
I'm looking at it right now. It's really cool.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Let's see. Last but not least, one of the coolest places I've ever been. It's this place called the Refugio Frey Hut. It's an off-grid backcountry hut in Bariloche, Argentina. It's not by a famous architect, but it's made of granite, wood paneling, a tiled roof. It gets filtered water from a lake nearby, powered from a turbine. It can sleep like 30 people. It's mainly used in the summer by rock climbers.
Okay.
But I actually went back in 2011 with a group of backcountry skiers and snowboarders. It's nothing fancy, but it's a super cool place, and I have like such great memories. So I'll end it with that.
That's awesome.
So
I like that.
So you said 2, you gave us 4. I take
That's
that.
a great spectrum.
Those are really
I love
cool. Yeah.
Grant, thanks so much for making the time to be on here. I think this was very interesting for sure, and I know it's going to be helpful for a lot of people.
No, it was great to talk to you both. Thanks for the time.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to this week's episode. If you like what we're doing, then please support the show by leaving a review of it in the Apple Podcast app. You can also find us on YouTube and Spotify. The podcast has a website, which is secondstudiopod.com, and that's the same as our Instagram handle. We have a nice little following on there, so follow us, comment, like, engage in conversations. You can find our office, Fame Architecture and Design, everywhere as well. And
the hotline.
The podcast has a hotline.
Yeah, you can call or leave a voicemail. The number is 213-222-6950. That's one way to reach us. We also have the website that has all of our episodes and more. And that's it.
That's it, yeah.
That's it. A lot more coming up. It's only the beginning of 2024.
Okay. Talk soon. Bye.
Talk soon. Bye.